I can't explain how I do it or how anybody else does it, but you're thinking cartoon and you're thinking visually how it can be done in cartoon, because it's nothing in live action could compare. I guess you got to use your instincts to guide you in a lot of stuff, whether it's right or wrong. I mean, you can't set any rules, because half of them don't work.
I think Friz Freleng gets taken for granted sometimes because he isn't as flamboyant, let's say, as some of the other directors, and he doesn't show off as much. But then you look at the body of his work and you look at some of the specific gems that he made over the years, and you realize just how many really wonderful cartoons he made, and you realize he takes a backseat to nobody.
Here! Friz would go for the belly laugh, and he goes for the humor.
He knows a gag, and he knows how to pull it off.
He could pull off a gag like nobody else could.
He's just, you know, he was a master.
When I got out of high school, I was looking for a job, and there was an ad in the want ads for a boy, an office boy who could draw. I gathered up all the material I had around, and I went down to this place, and I got to the doorstep, and I figured, Jesus, I'm too amateurish for that. There must be professional artists there. So I turned around and went home. I never went in. I was scared to go in. And my mother said, "Did you get the job?" And I said, "Nah, somebody else got it." So I believe in fate, because 2 weeks later, the same ad appeared. And this time I gathered the stuff in, and I went down there, and they hired me. And who was working there? Walt Disney.
They were part of a group doing Newman's Laugh-O-Grams, which were kind of topical gags based on current Kansas City news at the time that they would run in movie theaters. They had to crank them out very fast. Friz was there with Hugh Harman and Rudolph Ising and Ub Iwerks and Walt Disney himself running the show. I
really didn't know Disney when I worked there, but my contact was Hugh Harman, and he helped me quite a bit. I owe a lot to him.
And then Walt moved out to Hollywood, and he needed extra animators. He had Ub Iwerks, and he had Hugh and Rudy joined him out here to make the Alice comedies, which were for Margaret Winkler release.
Hugh said he was going to go to California, and I was to take Hugh's place as an animator. I said, I don't know anything about animation. So he said, well, here's what, he showed me what he was doing. And he says, get a book in the library called Lutz's Book of Animation, and read that and they'll tell you. So I was inking and painting, and I was doing the backgrounds and everything. I never held a brush before in my life. And the more I did, the more I learned.
But Walt ran short of animators, and he needed somebody, so he wrote a long letter to Friz saying, come out here, it's a great place to live and work, and you'll love it, you know.
When Walt wrote to me and asked me to come out, that was very exciting for me. And of course, I knew Hugh Harman and Ub Iwerks had gone to California to work on this thing. And I think that was a deciding factor for me.
The day Friz arrived on the train from Kansas City, Walt personally went down to Union Station to pick him up.
But strangely enough, he and Walt didn't get along too well. Walt was a really tough taskmaster and made Friz redo things a lot.
Walt and I never got along. I was his whipping boy.
And also there was a lot of hazing of the poor guy, because he was kind of short in stature. Like Hugh Harman used to tell me that he and Rudy used to grab him, walk down the sidewalk in front of the studio, and each would grab him by the arm and force him to walk really fast with them. And he hated it. He'd cussing and screaming at him, but you know, they wouldn't stop doing it.
Ub Iwerks, yeah. I worked right alongside of him, but he was really my mentor. Whenever I had a problem, he'd reach over and solve it for me.
And that's where Friz really cracked the director ranks. He began directing Oswald's, and he did some really good ones. And then Walter Lantz kind of moved in, took over, and Friz lost his job. And Hugh and Rudy split off, and they started the pilot film for Bosco, Bosco the Talking Kid. Friz figured out how to make Bosco talk. He looked at himself in the mirror, and I think they even shot a live actor to get the mouth positions right.
We talked some studio into letting us experiment with the sound, because everybody was experimenting with sound then. And so they let us record some voices and piano playing.
And that was some of the very first sound sync dialogue that was ever done.
Well, so long, folks. See you all later.
They couldn't sell Bosco for a long time. So Friz got a job in New York, working for the Crazy Cat studio.
They were not organized in any way, you know. They were just, I don't know, they didn't know where they were going. They were just animating stuff. That's where I met Artie Davis.
There was a cat and a mouse and a barn scene with animals from the barn, from the stable and stuff like that. And we tried to make them look real. But Friz had a little certain flair to it that it was recognizable.
Art Davis was way ahead of those guys in animation. I think he was superior to them. So Hugh met Leon Schlesinger, and Warner decided they wanted a cartoon. So I came out here, and we made the first one. It was the first Looney Tune called Sinking in the Bathtub, and that started it. I know we worked kind of like finding our way, because nobody really knew what the story was, really. It's just having the character do something. He said, you do about 20 feet here and see, you know, he meets a goat or something on the road. You add gags to it.
As was the trademark for many cartoons of that period, the synchronization to music, you know, was very, very important. So Friz was getting kind of an early education on that type of animation.
The only way we got sync was have to do it to rhythm. And the little girl would say, hello, Bosco.
Hello, Bosco.
So we just do it to a beat so we could hit sync. We had no other way to sing. We couldn't read track then. We didn't know about that. Of course, when Disney was making the Silly Symphonies, he was doing most musical things, and so well done that what we were trying to do was do a little bit of the Disney in every cartoon.
Warner's was interested in having their music catalog, Harms, you know, performed.
The purpose for making cartoons was to sell their music. 2 choruses was in every picture we made. And of course, I took up the whole picture. So it made a musical out of it, whether we wanted to or not.
She was an acrobat's daughter. She used to tame lions beside. One bit her named Jack, and she bit him right back. In 2 days, the poor lion died.
So that's why I did things that, like the dishes come to life, and then we're singing a song.
How do we know it's Sunday? We slept till almost after 1.
You really son of a gun.
Yeah, yeah. How do I know you love me? You say such crazy things you do.
You know I do.
We figured people got a kick out of saying like Lucky Strike cigarettes. You had Plucky Strike. They knew what you were kidding. You were kidding a product.
By a waterfall, I'm calling you.
He just tried every trick in the trade to get your audience to say, hey, isn't that cute, you know? No characters were developed for that. When Disney came up with Pluto and Mickey Mouse and the duck, then they started, the theater started demanding the characters. And so we were looking for characters too. But we didn't really have a main character until Porky came along.
We will now open our exercises with a recitation by our little friend, Porky Pig.
Well, I had trouble with Porky because he stuttered. And a lot of people said, you can't do that.
Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere.
That's why I did it, because everybody was using falsetto voices. Everybody saw everything sound the same. And I said, what can I do to make this character different? So I called up Warner's casting and said, have you got anybody who stutters? Yeah, they had this Doherty guy who stuttered. And the guy just could not get through a line, you know? And we were doing all our sound on film then. There wasn't any tape. If Jack Warner knew how much film I was using, I was through with animation. So I had to get somebody who would just mimic. And that was Mel, of course. And of course, Mel could do anything.
Mel Blanc was able to come up with comic twists on the idea of the stutter. He'd start to say one word and wind up saying another, or substitute, a shorter word for a longer word. He just added a charm to Porky.
I am known as the man with 1,000 voices. Shall I do my stuff? Yes, go right ahead.
That's a joke, son. That's a joke, that is. Yes, that's a joke. Everybody wants to get into the act.
But that was only in 999 voices. Shucks, I know I've got another one. Well, I'll think of it.
Friz would actually come into the booth with the actor Mel, and it wasn't just lip service directing. Friz would stomp around in the room and as I say, act out the character himself, which for the artist is sensational.
Mel really had a lot to do with the character becoming popular, I think. I think it's a combination of what we did in animation and what Mel did that made it successful. We were in a new business. Leon Schlesinger, all he cared about was making dollars. He was making film, and he didn't know or care what went on in the film as long as it was acceptable to Warner Brothers. As long as he made a buck, he didn't care what the characters were.
You know the story of Leon Schlesinger walking down the hall and hearing a bunch of guys laughing in one of the rooms, and he opens the door and says, "What's everybody laughing about? Why don't you guys get back to work?" Well, they were at work. They were thinking up gags for a picture.
I was tempted to go to MGM, it was about 1938, when they opened up a cartoon studio. I thought it was going to be like Schlesinger, you just do your own thing, but it wasn't that way at all.
He thought there were greener pastures over there, and all of a sudden he was saddled with this lousy Captain and the Kids series, which was based on the comic strip at the time, and they were pretty lackluster characters, pretty lackluster cartoons.
Once I went over to MGM, I knew it was a mistake, but I had to fulfill my contract. And the minute it was up, I headed back to Warner Brothers. I was very happy to get back there.
I didn't really want to get out of my contract, Leon. I was only fooling. Yeah, April Fool.
Okay, Porky. I know you come back.
You Ought to Be in Pictures, a great cartoon, and one of the few forays of mixing live action and animation at Warner Brothers. It was a bit of an autobiographical film for Friz, and legend has it that You Ought to Be in Pictures is his version of saying, "Thanks for having me back, Leon."
Yeah, thanks. Good evening, Maitre D. Am I the first to arrive? By the way, what's on the menu for tonight? In other words, what's cooking, Doc?
Frizz's earliest cartoons with Bugs Bunny, he was a very New York-y guy, and I think it's something that Friz tried to keep going throughout the series. As far as I know, I think the first Friz Freleng Bugs Bunny was Hiawatha's Rabbit Hunt. It was probably the second cartoon where Bugs actually had his New York voice.
Hey, what's cooking, Chief? Something smells good. Hey, what are you having for dinner?
Rabbit stew.
There had been a lot of other experiments along the way. Chuck Jones had done a couple, you know, one with kind of a Jimmy Stewart voice and another one with a kind of Woody Woodpecker goofball voice, which Cal Dalton and Ben Hardaway had also used in Harem Scarum. But I think Friz was sold on the New Yorkiness of this character because when Tex Avery brought that to the table in A Wild Hare, it broke audiences up. The last thing they expected to hear was this New Yorkie rabbit.
Say, wise guy. Oh, yeah? Yeah!
Often the writing in the cartoons is peppered with a lot of New York do's and does and dares kinds of expressions on Bugs, which some of the other directors wouldn't push quite so far.
Hey, Doc, come out of there. You can't do that. Who's a comedian in this picture anyway?
I know that he often felt during the series that Chuck Jones would get a little too kind of literate with Bugs, you know, and he'd say, no, he's a D's and Do's kind of guy, you know? He's from New York, he's from the streets.
If you look at any of the shorts, you'll see there's a Chuck Jones Bugs, there's a Bob Kimson Bugs, and there's a Friz Freleng Bugs. Of course, Friz always felt that his was the funniest, and I think it probably was. But yeah, there was a lot of competition among the three guys, particularly with Bugs.
Who is it? It's the filler brush man. Come in.
Daffy was one of his favorite characters. He always enjoyed working on Daffy.
Even early on, I think he was taking a more personality-driven approach to the duck.
Drop that gun, son. You're not blasting at no ordinary everyday meat on the table, Duck. I'm gifted. I'm just slopping over with talent.
He's trying to instill a lot of interesting character traits in Daffy that a lot of other people didn't try to get or didn't try to hit upon. In You Ought to Be in Pictures, which was the first cartoon with Daffy that Friz directed, you know, Daffy's already kind of a greedy little duck.
And now that you have seen my act, how's about a nice contract?
I think what he brought to Daffy in that period was Daffy being thoroughly obnoxious.
Boom! Over hill and over dale, we're always on the dusty trail, hunting fox and hunting quail. Tally-ho, I am a hunting fool. Giddy up, giddy up, giddy up. My horse and I are of the finest breed. Giddy up, giddy up, giddy up. Just like the wind, I ride my stalwart steed. Sure of foot, sure of eye. Peeling onions makes me cry. This makes no sense. So do I.
And I think that really was very, very funny because he wasn't unappealing when he was doing it. And later, when Chuck hit on the Rabbit Fire trilogy and the dynamic changed a little bit between Bugs and Daffy, Friz adopted that because it seemed to get a lot of good character mileage.
But you get no gratuity. It's enough that you've had the honor of having a celebrity like me in your hack. Daffy Duck, star of this show. See?
So now Daffy was the foil for Bugs always being the winner.
Boy, listen to that! They love me!
I like Showbiz Bugs better than any of the cartoons. I made one of the better cartoons because I thought it brought out Daffy Duck more than it did Bugs. Bugs was just a secondary character in that, really. It brought out the jealousy of Daffy Duck.
Ingrate.
I don't think I've ever worked with an artist, an animation director, a layout person, an animator that had the sense of timing that Friz Freleng did.
think it came very naturally to him. I think his characters were witty because he was very witty. And I also think that they had great timing because he had great timing. He had basically a gift in that particular area of his life.
Oh, the timing was great. Friz was great at that.
His timing was right on the nose. The timing was exquisite.
1 lemon meringue pie. 1 lemon meringue pie coming up. Pick up pie. Roger. Your pie, sir.
I was very proud of that thing for the timing where they came in and out with the pies.
Your pie, sir.
It worked perfectly. I look at it now, and it's amazing how it timed out.
1 coconut custard pie with whipped cream. 1 coconut custard pie with whipped cream coming up.
I don't know how I did it. I couldn't do it again.
Pick up pie. Rogerini.
When Friz Freleng animates to music, it's probably the best synchronization, the sharpest timing, and really the most musical of any animation that's ever been put on the screen.
He worked very closely with Carl Stalling and Milt Franklin and the musicians to coordinate the music very carefully with his cartoons. I mean, that's why he was so great with dances and things like that. His relationship with music was very exact and very mathematical, unlike a lot of the other directors who were a little looser with it. You know, they would use music as gags and funny stuff, but they weren't quite as precise.
He used to work on what they call bar sheets. And bar sheets, unlike exposure sheets, which have every column for every cell level and all the backgrounds and all that, basically have it worked out to musical bars and the amount of frames to musical bars. So he would plan the rhythms of his cartoons musically before anything was ever drawn.
He could take a bar sheet and work like nobody that I've ever seen. Boom, 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 boom. His music was kind of second nature to him.
It was done like you write music for me. I wrote action to the beat. I made the character or designed the scene to work in a kind of a musical term, you know, whether they came across a scene or I did it in phrases of beats. So it was designed like music is designed.
He would know exactly what he wanted to fall where, and it was a fairly easy task for Carl Stalling to come in and orchestrate to it.
Rhapsody in Rivets, where an entire skyscraper is built to Liszt's Second Hungarian Rhapsody. It's just a terrific cartoon. And if the director didn't have some feeling for music, I don't think he could do the cartoon.
Rhapsody in Rivets was an idea that stayed in the whole show, of building a building to that music. The music always suggested something that worked in rhythm, so that's what you did through the whole thing. I figured my audience knows the music, and when I put picture to it, they get a kick out of it.
When music was created for the Warner cartoons, they used the full studio orchestra.
Ridiculous! Insulting. That's a preposterous.
He had an orchestra there that was the same orchestra that did the features, because musicians had a contract, they had to work so many hours, and if a picture only took 8 hours and they had 15 hours left, they had to pay for them anyhow. They let us use that orchestra. I remember when I had George Gimple, the pianist, do that concert for me, the piano playing. At that time, I didn't know who Gimple was, really. Warner sent him over, and I used him, and I told him how fast to play it and what portion to play, and he was kind enough to do it instead of argue with me, and I made him play it. He said, I never played anything that fast in my life.
I could hear in what I was animating to whether his left hand was doing a certain thing approximately. So I'd approximate that and, you know, bringing it up like that, whatever looked like, you know. Jazz piano players wouldn't do that. They're just going like mad. But if you're playing something, you know, subtle, like some of that music was, a classic, like, you'd have that look on your face. Your eyes are closed, and boy, you're off in a dream, as it were. And I tried to get to what I felt was the type of a feeling in the hands that would work with that when I listened to the soundtrack.
Rhapsody, that's a number that I can manipulate. I can use a phrase of it. I can conduct it.
Everybody at Warner's had their own directorial style, and Friz Freleng was no exception. He also had great animators with him, like Virgil Ross and Jerry Chinicki and Art Davis. And each of them had their own styles within Friz's directorial style.
One of the interesting things watching him look over my shoulder at the cartoons was he would pick out scenes. He'd say, there's one of your dad's scenes. And another one, there's one of your dad's scenes. I said, Friz, how do you know that? I said, it's been 40 years. How can you remember? And he says, I'm not remembering. He said, it's like handwriting. I can just tell. It's his style.
There's such a difference between, like, Ken Champion's scene and Jerry Chinicki and Bob Matz, every one of them, Virgil Ross. I just look at it and say, that's Virgil Ross. It's like his signature.
I really think animators, whether they realize it or not, you're an actor. Only you're doing it on paper.
Well, he's an actor, I think. That's what I think it is. An actor can draw a little bit.
And it was just an awful lot of fun. You could learn to do things that you couldn't do yourself, but you could do it in animation.
When a director casts an animator, it's like a live-action director casting an actor. So, for example, Jerry Chinicki was terrific at all of the dance scenes. So whenever Friz had a dance scene, it would automatically go to Jerry Chinicki.
Complicated steps, you know, like tap dancing and things like that, that Jerry could do. None of the other animators could work it out. I would get up and dance, he would dance, and he'd break it down, we'd break it down, I'd make drawings, we'd make sketches, and we'd figure out how to make a tap dance.
One of the most famous examples was Bugs' soft shoe in Bugs Bunny Rides Again. It's a great bit, and there wasn't really anybody in the unit who could animate that other than Jerry Chinicki.
He did some of the very best stuff. Like Bad Old Putty Tat, that has the badminton game.
Now, how you suppose I got me little self in such a predicament?
The thing that Jerry Chinicki brought to it was the grace. Like, when the character jumps up in the air, there's a certain little graceful action that the arc of the foot takes, you know. They just hold up in the air and they come back down again as he's getting ready to swat the badminton bird. You know, all that stuff, I think, is things that Jerry Shinneke brought to it.
Art Davis, who started animating for Friz later, did really, really sharp expressions and timings. You can see a lot of that stuff in This Is a Life and in Showbiz Bugs, particularly Daffy's expressions. They're beautiful, beautiful drawings.
And Art Davis was great on action, wild stuff, you know. He was very broad. I'd have to tone him down.
Go ahead, scratch me. I dare you to scratch me.
That isn't funny. It's a hurt gag, but the way it comes out, you laugh at it.
Virgil Ross, he would give a lot of the very three-dimensional acting scenes too. Virgil could turn the characters around in a very, very convincing three-dimensional way.
You know, Virgil was a great animator for personality. He could play a piano and he could do those things.
Yosemite Sam picture with Bugs where he slaps Yosemite Sam's face with a glove. That's all Virgil stuff. And very beautifully done.
And Bugs, before he goes into his walk, he gets kind of a little cocky sort of thing. Then he makes a turn and with his eyes closed looking up as if this is a cinch, you know, nothing can happen to me. But they liked the way I did that, and that's one of the best things I think I did like that.
If you've ever looked at Virgil's originals, they're very sculpted, you know. He really worked hard to get the construction of the heads right and where the shoulders are placed and the hats and all the stuff that's very difficult to draw.
I want you, baby. Your eyes, your lips. Come with me to the Casbah. We'll make beautiful music together.
Friz didn't like to do background layouts or even detailed character layouts. He'd let Holly Pratt redraw most of his roughs.
I would work rough and turn it over to Holly, and he'd finish it up. If there was anything wrong, he'd correct it. I'd just pose it, rough pose, and Holly would take it over.
Pratt was Friz Freleng's only layout man. He depended on Pratt for his style.
Well, he added a lot to my work. I mean, he plussed it.
Noble knights of the round table.
Because it's funny, like, if you see Friz's roughs for anything, he always kind of drew like the 1920s. He still drew like he was working on Oswald or Crazy Cat or something. If he drew a mouse, it was a 1920s mouse with little round dots for eyes and a long nose. And somebody else would change it into a more constructed mouse with a color set between the eyes and sculpted ears and everything. But the idea was always there.
Friz, I think, was very good at analyzing exactly what each one could do the best, and obviously that's what he wanted them to do. It's to his advantage, and he made it nice for the animators, too.
All of them are subscribing to what Friz wants as a director. You have to hit that note, you have to hit that beat. It's only going to take 3 frames to slam into the wall, so on and so forth. The timing and the staging is all Friz's.
That's him. That's that coward-chewing wascal.
I think he adored Bugs, of course,
You're getting warmer, Doc.
and liked the way he particularly interpreted Bugs.
No, you're getting colder. Colder.
I think that Friz was more concerned about possibly the development of newer characters. And that's how we came across Tweety.
I saw Putty Cat. I did saw Putty Cat.
Hello, breakfast.
Clampett had done a couple of them with Tweety, and I had done a cartoon with Sylvester and a little woodpecker prior to that. He wasn't really Sylvester at that time. It was a cat. And about the time I started to do this one with the woodpecker, Clampett left. And then I thought, hell, you know, I don't want to use that woodpecker. I'll use that Tweety. It would make a better character. Clampett used him as a violent character, if you've ever seen the cartoon. But he was cute, you know. And I think that's the intention that he had, that his cuteness forgave him being violent because he was being attacked. Selzer came in. I said, well, gee, I would like to use that Tweety instead of the woodpecker. And he said, oh, no, you don't. He says, that woodpecker is the whole show. And I said, oh, no, he isn't. And he insisted that it was the whole show. He wouldn't let me change it. So I told him, I said, Ed, since you've been here, well, I guess it was there 6 months or so. I said, since you've been here 6 months and I've been here 15 years, and you know more than I do, here. And I give him the pencil. I said, you do it. And I went home. But I knew he was going to chase me. I knew he wasn't going to let me go. And so that night he called me on the phone, and he said, go ahead and do it the way you wanted to do it. So I did his Tweety, and of course that won the Academy Award. The stories weren't any different. We just put them on in different locations. But the idea, the intent was to get the bird, and he had a defense. Sometimes he had a dog that defended him, and sometimes he had Granny.
Well, here we are at last, Tweety, in Venice, with all its Venetian blinds. You enjoy the scenery, Tweety, while I freshen up. Dee 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 dee.
When Friz hired me to do Granny, having not been a cartoon buff really very much, I didn't know that there had been a previous Granny before that B. Benaderet did. Otherwise, I probably would have gone to the theater and studied what had been going on before. I just knew that Granny was very protective of Tweety Pie, and that Sylvester was about to pounce on him at any opportunity.
Oh, hello, pretty cat. What you doing up there?
Granny was a very sweet, nice, accommodating little lady, but she had an edge to her when it came to Sylvester, of course.
If there's one little feather, just one little feather harmed of this bird, I'm going to sell you to the violin string factory. Remember?
I would say she was eccentric. She even looked eccentric. I guess Friz determined that.
If you really want to beat this, look us up. We can help you.
It won the Academy Award, for one thing. And in Birds Anonymous, there is a sequence where Sylvester is not supposed to eat a bird anymore. So Friz, to get the power of this feeling that Sylvester is really stressed out, he did maybe 6 shots of him in different poses in this bed. It took about 45 seconds, that's 30 feet of animation, to do that.
Uh-oh, here we go again.
Instead of having another director saying, well, I'll have him pacing back and forth and moping around and animating him, sitting on a chair, getting up and pacing, he did it with 6 stills. So he saved a lot of money.
One.
You just saw him suffer mentally, which is not easy to do in animation.
Do you have a message for Mr. Fudd?
Friz didn't like Elmer Fudd.
Oh, you treacherous twigster.
As a matter of fact, I don't think any of the directors liked him.
Usher!
the quota would come down from the head of the cartoon studio, how many we're going to do, and Elmer always, there was always one of them, and they always hated the idea of doing Elmer. They really, none of them. I'm talking about Chuck, Bob McKempson, or Friz. They didn't want to have anything to do with Elmer Fudd.
I wasn't dissatisfied, but I figured, how many times are we going to have him hunt a rabbit? Because he was always a hunter.
I think in self-defense, that's where Friz came up with Sam.
Any one of you lily-livered, bow-legged varmints care to slap leather with me? In case any of you get any ideas, you better know who you're dealing with. I'm the hootin'est, tootin'est, shootin'est, bobtail wildcat in the West.
Yosemite Sam came along just because I was going to do a Western, the old hold up of the train thing. And I wanted to be comedy, a comical character. I figured I'm going to make the smallest character I could draw on the screen with the biggest voice he could get. But I never figured he'd ever work in another one. But he worked so well in this one, I said, that's the guy to work against Bugs, because he did work against Bugs very well that one. I kept using him instead of Elmer Fudd. When I teamed Sylvester with Tweety, there was no doubt there from there on, that was the team. It was like Abbott and Costello thing, you know, it worked. And Yosemite Sam and Bugs, it worked too. Just once you got the combination, it worked, you know, why do it any other way? Or with anybody else.
To the lifeboats, to the lifeboats! We're foundering fast! Oh, no you don't. The captain goes down with his ship.
I resign. You're captain.
Oh, no, you're captain.
Oh, no, you're captain.
Oh, no, you're captain.
I'm captain, and I say you're captain. Captain.
One thing about Sam is his character stayed steady and I put him in armor. I made an Arab out of him. I made a Trojan out of him. And no matter how I dressed him, you couldn't disguise him. He was still Sam.
Here comes Yosemite Sam now. I'm Sam von Schmam, the Hessian. That's who I am. I'm a sailing with a tide, or my name ain't Shanghai Sam. And it is. Vote for Honest Sam. I'm Riff Raff Sam, the riffiest riff that ever riffed a raft. Seagoing Sam, the bloodthirstiest, shoot-'em-firstiest, doggone worstiest buccaneer has ever sailed a Spanish Main. Yeah, Chillicoot Sam, the roughest, toughest, rudest, shootingest claim jumper that ever jumped a claim. It takes a heap of doing to outsmart Renegade Sam. Yosemite Sam of outer space.
The whole thing with Sam that made him funny is because he's trying to outdo Bugs, and he never can. Tries he will, you know.
He was a funny voice, I thought. Well, he was all out. You know, there was no subtleties of him.
Ooh, listen, Rabbit. Yosemite Sam never makes a mistake. Now get that flea-bitten carcass off in my real estate.
But Mel hated to do that voice. I know he did, because I heard his voice. I heard his throat.
Great horny toads.
And when he knew he had to do a Yosemite Sam, I think his stomach turned and he said to do this again. Bugs really didn't do anything.
Crazy idiot!
He got Sam to do it. Bugs just used him.
It sure is getting powerful warm in here.
It's just like that high diving hair. Sam was destroying himself all the time, you know. Bugs just tricked him into doing it.
I dashed you to step across this line.
I'm a steppin'. I hate you.
He would milk that to a point where you get the danger set up, where he has to go up a ladder and go out there, and 2 or 3 times he would show you how Bugs Bunny would trick him. He's grabbed you with the gag, okay, and he could do that for the whole show if he wanted to, and you'd keep laughing.
It was just one gag, really, all the way through. I'm coming up the ladder and diving down, and coming up the ladder and going down. I said, how did I dare do that? It was quite a gamble, but it worked.
Let's see you get out in this one. This time you're a diving.
I've always loved the idea somehow that Yosemite Sam is based, however loosely, on Friz himself.
Yosemite Sam, that was strictly Friz. That was the personification of Friz.
Of course, Friz wasn't a very tall man, and they always cartooned him as very small, you know, and things like that.
I'm a little person, and we looked at each other eye to eye, you know.
I've only known and met Friz on social occasions, so I don't know if he has a temper that anywhere near resembles Yosemite Sam's.
And every time I look up from the desk, here's Friz looking over my shoulder.
I insisted and hung over guys' back and insisted he do it my way.
How's it going? How's it going? Well, gee, it hasn't even started yet.
In fact, he was hard on himself, hard on people. He wanted to be as perfect as he knew how to make it.
He knows what he wants when he sees it, I'll tell you that. Calling yourself an animator? He said that to somebody who was pretty well known over at HB one time.
He was a perfectionist, and I think, you know, in order to be successful in this business, you have to be the #1 guy. It has to be your way or no way.
Everybody calls me a tyrant, so I guess I was. The tyrant is a guy who insists on having it done a certain way. And so I guess that's how I got the reputation of being a tyrant.
Open that bridge, Farman! Open it, I say! Close it! Close it! Close it up again!
Friz won the Academy Award for 90 Night Bugs, which is a cute one with Yosemite Sam.
When Friz got the Oscar for 90 Night Bugs, he had all of us take a picture with the Oscar. He hired a professional photographer so he could do this, and we all stood there with our Oscar.
What's the matter, amigos? You missed me, huh?
I made the first one with Speedy Gonzales. I went to the cheese factory up back and forth. And I could see a lot of gags in it. And that won an Academy Award. So then I made a number of them after that, which I didn't like the character because I think you only do one thing with him.
Hello, pussycat. Adios.
Oh, no. I never thought Speedy was that funny. I think Slowpoke Rodriguez was funnier.
Buenas noches, Señor Gato. My name is Slowpoke Rodriguez. Is this where lives it, my cousin, Señor Speedy Gonzales?
Slowpoke? Yeah, sure. Come right in.
I like him, but I couldn't use him very often because he ate up too much film. I thought he'd be a funny character. Well, we only had 6 minutes to do a film, and this guy took up so much time to talk that I figured, hell, I can't keep him going, so I used him once or twice.
And that was the opposite. They went and said, let's get the extreme. We'll go to the complete opposite, very slow. Hello, you know, my sister.
But Speedy was really one of Friz's most popular characters in the 60s. And he ended up with 2 more Oscar nominations for his Speedy cartoons. In fact, Friz won more Oscars for his cartoons than any other director who worked for Warner Brothers. He really was the director who put his mark on that studio because he was there from the very start, all the way to the very end. It was the most insecure job you could ever have. They threatened every day to close the studio. Here you're raising a family with kids, and what can you do if you don't animate, you know, if you're not making cartoons?
I get this call to come back to the New York office to attend a board meeting. And anyway, I go back there and I'm told that the decision has been made to close the cartoon division.
They closed the studio on us. Everybody was out of a job. So, yeah, I mean, the whole picture business is insecure. Any part of it.
When all this came to pass, I got to thinking that I'd really like to form my own studio. So Friz and I had a long lunch, and we chatted about the possibilities of going into business together. Several days later, we met again, and he said, "I'd very much like to join you." Things really changed when that fateful day when I got the call from Blake Edwards about the Pink Panther. I get this call from Blake. He says, "I'm back. I got the movie in the can. I know what I want to do. Come over." And then he told us that what he wanted us to do was to create a main title sequence.
And he showed me some of the dailies that he had, and I put a storyboard together. It was probably the longest title ever done at that time. I think it was 7.5 minutes long. Blake Edwards, he didn't change anything. He says, "That's wonderful. Go ahead and make it." He got a lot of publicity, and Time magazine wrote it up. Then United Artists says, "Hey, why don't we make some shorts with the character?" And the first one I had done with that music won Academy Award. So, you know, you never know what's going to do it.
This is a letter written a few months before my dad passed away. It was written by Chuck Jones. "Anyone can triumph in a field of ordinary, but you were a real giant, Friz, in a field of real talents. There probably never again will be such a bunch of untamed artists corralled together. But we were there, Friz, and you were the linchpin that held us all together, that taught us our trade, that caught us in the net of your genius."
Whether you can do what we did in those days, it's hard to tell.
They were such halcyon days at Warner Brothers.
And as far as working at a studio, that was my favorite. Those years were the golden years.
Most of these studios think that they can just throw bodies together, say, all right, here's 4 animators, here's 3 directors, throw them together and make cartoons. It doesn't work that way. It was a magical thing that developed at Warner Brothers with all the 3 units, McKempson, Chuck, and Friz.
You can't help but laugh at the situations that you get into with Friz, but he's an absolute genius.
I said, oh, he's a tough guy to work for, but he was a wonderful man to work with. He gave me all the breaks a person could have.
Very humble, loaded with humility, and he never thought of himself as anything but a guy who went to work in the morning and went home at night. He never had any delusions of grandeur. There was nothing about the guy, not one little bit, that would ever lead you to think or to know, you know, what a fantastic talent, and I use the term genius, that he was.
I don't think I ever made a cartoon that I wouldn't like to change something in it. I don't think any of us ever make a cartoon that we're completely 100% happy with. I like what I did. If you don't like what you're doing, you can't make a good cartoon.
Figaro, 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 Figaro. Figaro.